We are recording. Good morning, everybody.
Hi there.
Introduce yourselves. Who do we
I'm,
have here?
I'm Karen Busby. I'm a professor of law at the University of Manitoba Faculty of Law.
And
I'm Alexis Alabizos. I'm a 2L student at Robson Hall.
And I'm David Asper. I'm the acting dean at the law school. The date is Thursday, January 7th, 2021. And our purpose here today is to get to know Professor Busby a little bit better, maybe a little more detail than what we can see on her lengthy and accomplished CV, and look forward to this. And Karen, you wanted to do this at 8:30 in the morning. You're a morning person, aren't
I'm
you?
a morning person. I've been up since 4:30.
Have you always been that way?
No, I wasn't a morning person until the last 3 or 4 years. But I love it. I love getting up early in the morning, watching the sunrise, watching the world wake up, and feeling that I get a lot accomplished early in the morning. The downside is I can't stay awake at night. So dinner parties, all my friends know I'm going to crawl into their bedroom around 9 o'clock and go to sleep.
It's a safe way to live because we all know that nothing good happens after midnight. So best to tuck in early. I can't start this. We had a fairly momentous day yesterday. So today is January 7th. On January 6th, 2021, Congress was meeting to certify the election of the Electoral College in the United States. I was actually sitting in a Senate meeting and had the TV on in the background, and I glanced over as things exploded, and I sent a text to Chris Adams at St. Paul's, and I said, "Are you watching the news?" And he wasn't, and he thought I was referring to the Georgia runoff election or the cabinet picks, and he had no idea what was going on. What did you see it as it unfolded yesterday in
What as it
Washington?
unfolded? No, I'm not that active on social media. So, I mean, my partner was calling out to me, telling me what was going on, but I really didn't realize the full magnitude of it till I watched the news last night and then read the papers this morning. One of the things we say in constitutional law is constitutions are only as good as the people that administer them. And, a constitution can make a good government better, but it can't make a bad government good. And, we're seeing that. I mean, I didn't ever think we would see that play out the way we have in the United States. But that's what we're seeing play out. A good constitution can't make a bad government good.
Yeah, I mean, people see it superficially as a conflict and people scaling walls and breaking down doors and stuff. But there are some existential issues at play here, and I think, doesn't it illustrate the frailty, no matter how big your building is or how dense your documents are, the frailty of the whole system?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, violence can, rip down all sorts of institutions. One of the things that I find interesting in Canada over the last, since the COVID pandemic started, is we've seen unprecedented levels of agreement and cooperation between the federal and provincial governments. And, in the greater good, they've come together. And in contrast, that's not happened in the United States. So I think we've seen a reduction of partisanism in Canada. And we need to see that in the United States. The Republican Party has to step up and denounce Trump and his cronies and support the new government.
Now, I see you were doing poli-sci and economics if I just look at your bio, and I want to go right back to the beginning of your life here, but just because we're talking politics, I see that you were doing poli-sci and economics from 76 to 78. Were we in any classes together? Did you have like Bellin in economics or Fox
No, I
Deasons
had
or any of these legends?
Gonick and I forget his name. A short Jewish man. I forget his name. Not
Bellin.
Bellin. No, it wasn't Bellin. It's
Loxley?
embarrassing. No. He was a Marxist. So.
And what about poli-sci? Did you get Tom Peterson
I had
Paul Thomas?
Paul Thomas, and then Merrick Dubicki.
Merrick.
Yeah,
he was fantastic.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah, he was an iconoclast, so I was mesmerized by him. Yeah.
So so let's just go back there though, because you're distinguishing between Canada and the US, and I'm just kind of interested. And again, it sounds kind of superficial, but are we actually truly culturally a peace order and good government kind of country, like deeply culturally, versus, a sort of a more revolutionary mindset in the United States that actually persists to this day?
This isn't my area of expertise, but I do think if you scratch the skin of most Canadians and ask them what's more important, security or liberty, they'll say security. I think if you scratch the skin of most Americans, they will say liberty. So I do see that as a key difference between us. We're not as interested in the pursuit of happiness and personal liberty as we are in ensuring that we have a well-run government. I don't want to overemphasize that. I mean, we have some real disasters in Canada for sure. The first and foremost, the treatment of Indigenous peoples, but Canadians are interested in a fair and just and equitable society. At least that's an expressed value, and I think it's one we need to encourage people to explore more what exactly that means.
And there's another thing that it was pointed out, it started to emerge quite a bit last night as I watched the news, was, and it does deal with an area of your expertise, which is discrimination, which is how the whatever security forces were on site at the Capitol treated the I think it was universally white, mostly male protesters, versus how they sort of geared up and dealt with Black Lives Matter and social justice protesting that was going on through the summer.
Yeah, the symbolism of the police and how the police police powers are invoked is very important. And on that point, I really recommend a great movie from earlier this year, The Trial of the Group of Seven. Brilliant, brilliant movie on student protests and how those student protests were spun out.
Well, and we'll come to it a little bit, maybe in the context of your life, about struggle and protest. But let's okay. So let's. So we've witnessed this crazy day yesterday in the United States, a real challenge to democracy. I just can't imagine what would have happened if the protesters had gotten inside the building and all the legislators were in place. Like, I just can't imagine what would have happened.
It's shocking. It is shocking. Yeah.
Well, they would have effectively been taken hostage, including the Vice President of the United States.
Yeah.
Anyway, where do you?
Sorry.
Let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us where do you come from? Are you from Winnipeg? Where did you start?
I am a Canadian story. My mother's family is Icelandic, so they're she's third generation Icelandic, and they settled in the Interlake. My father's parents are first generation immigrants from England and Scotland, and they settled in Vancouver. And my parents met in the Yukon. And so they moved to the middle of those three places, which was Edmonton. And I lived there until I was 12 years old, just before my 13th birthday, when we moved to Winnipeg.
Now, your mom had quite an interesting story, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. She was a nurse, and she was a big adventurer. So the biggest adventure she could imagine for herself when she graduated from nursing in the early 50s was to go to the Yukon and work in a hospital in the Yukon. So on her own, she went up to the Yukon.
Now, I'm going to, when you kindly agreed to do this, you suggested that we play Two Truths and a Lie. And I'm going to share my screen here with what your Two Truths and a Lie statements are. I competed in the World Highland Dance Championship in '76. My father was a bank robber. Michelle Wee, for those who don't know, I don't know, is she still golfing?
She's still golfing, yep.
As a world-class professional golfer. So there's 3 statements. 2 are true, 1 is a lie. I'm not going to ask you to reveal anything here at this moment, and I'm going to stop sharing, and we'll leave it as a cliffhanger.
Okay.
Yeah, we're back together. So you grew up in Edmonton.
I grew up in Edmonton, that's right, yeah.
And what about your family? Do you have siblings and
I have
brothers
6
and sisters?
siblings. So my mom had 7 children, 9 years apart. So when my brother, when my youngest sister turned 50 recently, all of us were in our 50s at the same time.
Wow.
So
Wow.
a big family, and it was fun. I remember it being a lot of fun. I mean, it was boisterous, it was loud, it was noisy, it was active, it never stopped, but it was a lot of fun.
That's a lot of people.
It was a lot of people, yeah.
And where are they still? Are they still alive and everybody
Everybody's still
thriving? And
alive,
where are
and
they?
most are here in Winnipeg, but I have a brother who's in Edmonton and another brother in Vancouver.
Did anybody else find their way into law?
No, one of my brothers is a minister in an evangelical church. Another brother was in the army, so we ended up in the 3 professions. And a sister is a nurse practitioner. So we have a lawyer, someone in the army, someone who's a pastor, and someone who is a medical professional. And then my other siblings do other things.
My wife would say all you need now is a vet. You need someone to be a vet so you can look after your pets. So was it a kind of a normal life in Edmonton?
It was. I mean, as I said, it was a lot of fun. I was very athletic, and so our lives, were situated around the baseball diamond and the skating rink, and and then I mean, it was
And
very
and
active and very fun.
and were you I mean, you're a professor of law. You're an extremely accomplished scholar and academic. Were you always a great student?
I was a pretty good student, yeah. Yeah, I loved reading. I read at least a book a week as a kid. If I didn't have a book to read, I read an encyclopedia. My parents picked up, the Britannica encyclopedia. You could get the weekly volumes at Safeway, and they would pick up a volume each week, or maybe you got them free with your groceries. I can't remember, but these books constantly appeared in the house, and so I was an encyclopedia reader.
There are people who've actually tried to read those encyclopedias from cover to cover. In fact, I think there's a book, A.J. Jacobs, who's a humorist, wrote a book about trying to read all the Encyclopedia
Yeah.
Britannica. It certainly fills you with a lot of
It feels you,
information.
yeah. Well, and I was on the reach for the top team in grade 12, and it was very helpful to have read encyclopedias as a kid.
Okay, we're going to get to grade 12. So you went to and lived in Edmonton until when?
1971, I think,
And what grade would you have been in?
between grade 7 and 8.
And then something happened in your life that's going to get us to reveal part of the game that we're playing here with 2 truths and a lie. You made a move. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, my mother decided it would be a good idea to move the kids to Winnipeg, back to where her family was. So the decision was made to up and move us all, and we moved to Winnipeg. And major
And,
upheaval.
yeah, I mean, for you in junior high, that's got to be a big deal.
Yeah. Well, one of the most shocking things about the move is in Alberta, you don't study French until grade 8 or 9. And so I hadn't studied any French. And when I came to the junior high school that I was enrolled in Winnipeg, if you hadn't studied French, then you were put in the class for academically challenged students, because only those students who were not mainstreamed academically were not taking French. So so I was put in this class with that was understimulating, and it was horrifying. And I realized that I needed to do something to get out of that class, or my life options were going to be significantly limited.
Well, that's interesting. What did you do? Because you did you study in French at Sorbonne?
Yeah, I did, ultimately.
So you go from not having any French in school into the sweat hog class in Winnipeg when you get here because you don't have French, to then studying at the Sorbonne. Did you
Well, no,
just
I
learn
studied
it?
French at the Sorbonne. No, I didn't study. I was studying French, so it was
Oh,
a program at the Sorbonne for people to study French.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then you get through. No, I mean, it must have been hard, like just socially, being dislocated in the middle of junior high.
Yeah, but I mean, lots of kids go through that. You know, I mean, I was very involved in athletics as a kid. You know, I originally thought I would be a phys ed teacher. So sports and books saved me, really. You know, I was very, very serious kid, and I always had part-time jobs, babysitting, and so on. So there was no time to get into trouble because I was busy all the time.
Did you work like, you know, in a mall store or something like that? Like
You know,
a,
I had the great good fortune of babysitting for people that owned one of the first stores on Osborne Street when Osborne Street became a place for shopping. And they were a place that sold handmade furniture, and they sold pottery and other artworks. And I was invited to work sometimes on Saturdays when things were busy, and one of my other sisters would take over the babysitting duties. And through that, I became connected to the Winnipeg visual arts community. And, you know, and the most important thing I think for kids is they've got to find mentors in their lives, people that they connect to that, you know, bring them into spheres that they would not otherwise be brought into. And, you know, there's a direct link between having worked at the Young Designer Store on Osborne Street in the 70s as a clerk and just absorbing everything that was going on around me, and ultimately being, for example, doing a 10-year stint on the board of the Winnipeg Art Gallery.
yeah, it is formative, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
it does
absolutely.
affect you. Did you have any idea what you wanted to do sort of through high school, career wise, or was it
Well,
just?
originally I wanted to be a doctor, but I wasn't good enough at math to be a doctor, which, you know, was kind of too bad because I would have been a good doctor. And then I wanted to be a phys ed teacher, but I looked around and I didn't see any old phys ed teachers. And I thought, well, nobody's a phys ed teacher forever, so this doesn't look like a very good career option. And so then I decided, well, I would be a lawyer, and I had no idea what lawyers did. But I knew that it was a steady job, and I knew it was a prestigious job, it was kind of an unrealistic dream, but I decided I'd become a lawyer. So I started law school without ever having spoken to a lawyer and with no clue what lawyers did.
Which is interesting because some people grow up wanting to be, or you know, having heroic ideas of lawyers and wanting to be like that lawyer. And so you just went into it
It was an idea.
with it was an idea.
Yeah.
And
And then what I thought I would do is I would get the best possible job I could have. And then I would say, this isn't important to me, and I would quit. And then I would go back and finish a PhD in economics and become an economics professor. But by the time I finished my law degree and my articling, I thought, you know, this is more interesting than I thought. And it's a much shorter path to becoming a law professor than an economics professor at this stage of the game. So I stayed in law.
did you have to, when you applied for law, yeah, you would have had to do an LSAT, right?
Yeah.
On the old 800 scale.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How did
And
you?
I didn't do very well on the LSAT. I had a 4.3 grade point average, though. So my grade point got me in after I started law school after 2 years of arts. So I didn't finish my arts degree.
Interesting. And then when you went to law school, so you started law school in what, 81, I think.
No, 78.
Sorry, 78.
Yeah.
So that was a completely different era,
Yeah.
wasn't it? I mean, what
Yeah.
did the fact like? Well, I mean, maybe like what was it like compared to what you see today at the law school?
Well, in a lot of ways, not all that much different. You know, it was about 20 to 25% women. So there's a higher percentage of women now than there used to be as students. There were some women on faculty. Janet Baldwin was on faculty. Linda Vincent was on faculty. Frida Steele hadn't come yet, but there were a couple of women at least on faculty. And Janet Baldwin was a brilliant teacher, so very inspirational teacher. You know, and the only person who's still around from those days is John Irving, of course. But I never had John as a professor. So you know,
Okay,
I
so
never had that
wait a
pleasure.
minute. So you were actually in law school when we call him Lord Irvin now, when Lord Irvin was teaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that weird?
No, because what was weird was when I came back, I graduated from law school in 81 and I started teaching at the law school in 88. And most of the professors that I had were still there. And the transition from student to professor was a difficult one. They had a lot of trouble seeing me as a professor when they had seen me as a student. So that was the more difficult transition.
We actually have that right now with Professor Ireland. I wonder if he feels the same way.
Yeah, hard to say. Hard to say.
But it's a classic problem, isn't it? Even certain people, when they article, are always viewed as the student, and it's some have a hard time sort of breaking out of that shell of being seen as the student to then become the lawyer and ultimately maybe a partner and a leader in the firm.
One of the phenomena we saw in the 90s was a number of women who had been legal assistants or paralegals in large law firms came to law school. And they brought tremendous experience and insight into the classroom, but they had trouble being taken seriously as lawyers when they tried to return to the firms from whence they had come. They wanted them to go back into the paralegal position because now they could do the paralegal job with vim, vigor, and vitality at half the salary.
Okay, I mean, okay, so I want to go back because I want to talk about at some point you started formulating some pretty strong views that led to activism and fields of your research focus. Was that always, did you have sort of a view of the world where you wanted to have or see change? Or was that something that came after, during law school?
Oh, it came before, definitely came before. I realized the injustice when we moved to Winnipeg of being put in the sweat hog classroom, as you described it, and just saw that, that was the first time I understood, at the age of 13, systemic discrimination, just because a certain kind of label was placed on you and you didn't meet certain criteria, then, you could be put in a situation where, very early on, a lot of life options could be cut off for you. So that was a revolutionizing act.
I'm gonna pivot to a bit of a reveal, but even let's just pause there for a moment, which is something that feels in the grand scheme of things a little less consequential, i.e., you don't have sufficient French, so they put you in a particular class. Out of I guess in the big picture, maybe it feels a little bit like it is creating the other at some level, but you actually it wasn't just doing that, but it actually had an emotional or an intellectual impact on you.
Yeah.
Just a little thing like that.
Yeah. Well, and then I set out to prove myself. So for example, I realized this was a problem and I needed to do something to prove myself. So I heard there was a cross country race. I didn't know what cross country was, but I knew I could run forever. And so without telling the teacher, I went to the cross country race and I won. I came in first in the race and the teacher said, "Who are you?" And
those are those your sort of your genetic Nordic roots?
Something like that. I don't know. Just a lot of walking as a kid. When you come from a family of 7, no one ever picks you up, and takes you places. You get places on your own, so you do a lot of walking, I guess. And but the teacher said, "Who are you?" and took notice. And I had tried out for the volleyball team and not made it. And I said, "I'm not coming back to any more races unless I get on the volleyball team." So I learned to fight for myself. And, and I think if I hadn't been involved in athletics in junior high and high school, then things could have turned out quite a bit differently from the way they had. But I was able to advocate for myself. But I remember that was very hard when the teacher said, "Who are you? Where did you come from?"
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the screen share because I want to remind everybody of the 2 truths and a lie, because because just on that point, on the sort of the challenge, meeting the challenge, I want to go. I want to. Which of these are true? I competed in the World Highland Dance Championship in 1976. Is that true or false?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
It's false. My high school did the play Brigadoon when I was in grade 11. And there was a woman in my class who was the World Highland Dance Championship in 1976, and I was one of the background dancers in the play. So I knew something about Highland dancing, but this other woman was the championship, a fellow classmate of mine.
Now, I didn't know that, so that means that number 2 and number 3 are true, correct?
That's correct.
Your father was a bank robber, and Michelle, we signed your cap.
That's right. When she won the Canadian LPGA in about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay, now you won't mind if my reaction to number 2, my father was a bank robber, is to go, holy cow, what are you talking about?
Well,
so let's put this now. So we've taken your chronological story. You're now in high school. You win a cross country race. You've been marginalized because of your French education. You get to university. Let's turn back the clock a little bit, because
okay,
I think there's more to the challenge that you faced on two levels that I want to talk to you about. So let's talk about the move to Winnipeg,
okay,
and the background there.
So I actually need to step back a little bit further. When I was in grade 4, my father was charged with 2 counts of armed bank robbery. And ultimately, both of those charges were dropped. But my oldest brother was in grade 7 at the time. My next brother was in grade 6. It was in grade 5, and I was in grade 4, and my other siblings were lower than that. And when he was charged, all the kids in our neighborhood were forbidden from playing with us. We weren't invited to birthday parties. We'd go to the skating rink, and people would yell out, "There's the getaway car!" And it was really, really tough. And but he, as I said, the charges were dropped. And then in the summer between sorry?
Was he did he have a job? Was he working? Did he have some sort of career?
Not really. Not he had he was a salesman of different things. So for example, I love this. When Edmonton is well known for Klondike Days, and he was the person who imported all the ostrich feathers. So he had an entrepreneurial spirit, and but he was never very successful at what he did. We relied on my mother's income as a nurse to keep us going.
So she's working as a nurse, and he's a salesperson.
Yeah, ostrich feathers.
And has a little side occupation.
Yeah, apparently has a little side occupation. So
he gets the first problem arises earlier, actually.
Yeah.
With 2 incidents where the charges are dropped.
Yeah, the charges were dropped.
Why? Do you know why they were dropped?
No, my
Okay.
9-year-old mind couldn't.
But everybody knew. Everybody knew what had
It was
happened.
on the front page of the Edmonton Journal, and everybody knew.
Wow.
And then when he was charged again, this was in the summer between grade 7 and grade 8. We were on a tenting holiday at a lake, and he needed to go back into the city a couple of times while we were on the tenting holiday. And when we came home from the tenting holiday and we were trying to unpack, the police showed up at the door, and they arrested him. And I don't know the details, but I think they actually found the money in a safety deposit box, or in a post office box or something. So he didn't get bail, and ultimately I think he pled guilty to 2 counts of armed robbery
And you were home when the police showed up?
I was at home when the police showed up. Yeah. And it was the chaos. You can imagine 7 kids coming home from a week at the lake tenting, dirty clothes, dirty dishes, dirty everything, total chaos. And the police come, and my father's taken away in handcuffs.
Do you have any memory of what that
Total
felt
chaos.
like?
Total chaos, and scary, really, really scary. And So what my mom did is she shipped out all the kids to various friends and thought about it for a little while and said, we've got to move to it. We've got to move. And we had no savings. So she went to the welfare office and said, you got to pay for the move to Edmonton. In Winnipeg, I can work in Winnipeg. She worked for the federal government. So she was able to get a transfer in her job as a nurse to another federal position in Winnipeg, but she had no money to move. So the welfare office agreed to pay for the move and we moved within a week.
And so you came here cold. I mean, I guess
She had her
did your
sisters. My mom had her sisters and her cousins, and her mother was still alive at the time. So we had extended family in Winnipeg.
so that must have been helpful.
Yeah, that was helpful. Yeah.
And then you have to start school in a whole new environment. You get the added thing where you don't have the French, so you get streamed off into a different class.
Yeah.
But you're leaving something that I take it you don't want people to know about.
Yeah. Oh, when we came to Winnipeg, like it was a total secret. Nobody could know about my dad, because of the experiences we'd had the first time around, 3 years earlier, which were just horrific. And now when it happened this time, my oldest brother was,
And you're saying just like teasing and bullying and
yeah. So my
taunting.
eldest brother was in grade 11 and my next brother was in grade 9. I was in grade 8 and my next sister was in grade 7. So, and junior high kids are the worst bulliers. And we had 3 kids in junior high, so nobody could know.
Did you ever have any further contact with them after you?
Yep. Yeah. So the summer between first and second year law school, I wanted to develop a relationship with him. So I went out to Vancouver where he lived after he was released, and he worked as a Teamster. He worked on the docks under the Granville Street Bridge, and he was a driver. And so this is quite funny. I got my union card and I worked as a Teamster and unloading ships in the docks of Vancouver between first and second year law school. Again, I was physically extraordinarily strong and I could do the work. And people knew who my dad was, so they left me alone. I was the only woman doing the work. And for whatever reason, my dad was respected on the docks. And so I was left alone to do my work. I think it could have been intolerable for other women, but I worked for me. So, I tried to develop a relationship with him then. It didn't really work out so well. I mean, we were always friendly and cordial with each other. The funny thing about my dad, you'll love this story, is he won $1 million in a lottery. In one of the first big lottery wins, he won
Wow.
$1 million, but he managed to blow all of that money. I'm not quite sure what happened to it.
I think that's what happens with lottery winners.
Yeah.
So you come here, as I say, as a stranger into a strange new school, and on top of that,
big secret,
that I think the family managed to keep, right?
Yeah.
So you were actually able to sort of shed that. Was that, was it liberating to you to not have to have people know about that?
Well, the fear always was people would find out, that teachers would find out, that classmates would find out, that parents of friends would find out, because the consequences had been really awful, the first time around. And that was a fear of mine well into my 20s, well into my professional life. If law firms knew, would they give me a job? When I worked for the federal court and I needed security clearance, if they found out, would I be denied security clearance? So it was a huge concern for a long time.
It's interesting because the law often talks about the stigmatization of the offender.
Never the family.
And with criminal convictions. It doesn't pay a lot of attention to what happens to the family. I just remember first being exposed to the Milgard family and the trauma that the family suffered. So I can imagine what you were trying to keep under the lid.
Yeah.
And then you're very well known for your work on sexual preference, sexual identity. You're in the Queer Hall of Fame. When did that start to become part of your life? And when sort of did you start to get an awareness of yourself?
Well, I think I knew, in my teens and 20s, but it was impossible. Like it was impossible. Discrimination was rampant. You could be fired. It's impossible to describe how rampant the discrimination was, and it was just not an option to be out, and not an option for me to be active. Sexually active. It just wasn't.
I think
The
people just
stakes were
pause
too
there for,
high.
well, yeah, pause there for a second, because I think we've evolved substantially as a society. We're not without discrimination, obviously still, but I think people forget what a serious ground or dividing line homosexuality was
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that saved me, frankly, is my best friend at law school was a gay man, and we dated. And we dated for 5 years. And, we came very close to marrying because that would have been the easy thing to do. And, and then he could have lived his life, I could have lived my life. And ultimately, we didn't marry, which would have been problematic in so many ways. But that was the way many queer people coped: is you found a partner who was also queer, and then you found a way to live your life. And those were caring, loving relationships. They weren't shams, and children would be produced and raised, and but there would always be an understanding that you'd have a lover on the side.
But you chose a different path. So, um, you know, you just said, no, I'm gonna, I guess, is what you said, I'm gonna be true to myself, or
Well, in the end, when the man I dated through law school, and afterwards, when we decided not to get married, that was I had been through articling by then, and he was my beard through articling, and I was his beard. He worked at a major Calgary law firm, and when there were big law firm parties, I would fly out to Calgary. He would come here for things, and we lived in different cities for most of our relationship, and but that was an effective cover up, really, to what was really going on. I mean, when I lived in New York, I did my graduate degree in New York, and I lived at a residence for international students, and I lived on an all-female floor, and the women on that floor were either lesbian or Muslim. And it was a really interesting combination of people. And so that was an important part of my coming out, was moving to New York at the height of the AIDS pandemic, and meeting a million lesbians.
so. Did you decide, though, that it wasn't just coming out, that you wanted to be a more vocal advocate, based on your own experience, and to help others who were not out?
Yeah. When I started my teaching career, I thought my first real love was administrative law, how government worked, how politics worked, and I loved that. And then when I first started teaching, I got this gig working on the Queen's Bench Rules, which was a project that gave me a lot of credibility. It's not a terribly interesting project, but I've worked on it now for 33 years. And I wasn't sure which direction my research would go. I got involved with LEAF, the Women's Legal Education and Action Fund, and LEAF work. I did a lot of work on sexual violence cases when I worked with LEAF. And my first five years of teaching, I just worked like a maniac around the clock. I had these various projects. I had a lot of ways to prove myself. I taught different courses. It was a crushing load. So there was no time for a personal life. But I also realized that I could not come out. It was just way too risky. It was just way, 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 way too risky. Hostility from students, was too risky. Hostility from faculty was too risky. But as soon as I got tenure, that changed for me. And I realized I could be an effective advocate now for the queer community in Winnipeg and in Canada.
Wow. I mean, just to sort of take a step back there, the hostility part. Again, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that memory is or the memory of it happening is as clear today as it was when it was happening, because as change happens, people's memories fade, and you forget what a demonized group or class of people went through. And even you're saying even the students, it was a risk with the students because it would because it would delegitimize you, or what?
Every time I came out to a class, and it was always a question of, when I talked about queer people, did I talk about them or we? And did I ever talk about my partner? Because by then I had a partner. But you can get away with having a partner because it looks like a roommate, right? And but she was a visual artist and she was quite public and out, so it was harder to. It wasn't really feasible to stay in the closet. And I'd been in the closet around my dad for a long time, and then being in the closet around being lesbian, it takes a huge toll on you. I mean, by then stuff with my dad had less of an impact. I wouldn't have been judged for him. I wouldn't have not got a job because of him at that by then, but I could have lost my job for being queer.
So it's interesting because you've now had a long and very, very successful career, and you've been recognized with teaching awards and awards of distinction all over the place. When you do you still feel and you were a fighter, you had to overcome a lot of stuff. Do you look back and sort of think about what you had to overcome, or is it just sort of shit happens?
It's more shit happens. I mean, once I got into law school, I remember when I phoned my mom to tell her that I got into law school. She was leading a national nurses strike at the time, and she was in Ottawa. And I phoned her to say I got into law school, and she said, "Good for you. Now I'm busy. I'll talk to you later." And but I knew my life had changed that day. That I got into law school. I'd made it. I was going to be okay. And then the other big shift came when I got tenure. And I
but with your mom leading a nursing strike, I mean, she was clearly an activist.
Yeah, she was an activist, so I got a lot of, I mean, she always said, I remember when in grade 12, I got the Governor General's Medal at my high school for academic excellence and potential for community service. And my mom said, "It's nice that you got this award, but much is expected from those to whom much has been given." And
don't you hate that? Don't you hate that?
She said you can celebrate today, but then that's it. There's much expected from you. So I always took that very, very seriously.
It's an amazing story. What do you think is the biggest change that you've seen in the law school or legal education since you came to the law school and started teaching?
Sadly, not much. I mean, the one thing that has changed is hostility to queer people. I think trans people still face a lot of hostility, but being gay or being lesbian, identifying, your affectional affiliations as being with someone whose genitals resemble your own is much, much easier than it was. But I still think it's a fraught road for women. I think it's a fraught road for people of color. I think it's a racialized minorities. I think it's a fraught road for, Indigenous peoples at the law school. We haven't done a major change in the way, we teach. We haven't done major changes in the way we evaluate. I actually don't think there's been huge change in what we do at the law school, and I think that's a problem. Like one of the things I promised when I started law school, because I'm a very anxious person, is I would never have 100% final exam. And I have never had 100% final exam in any course that I taught. I try to, and students don't give me pushback. We have a lot of small assignments, and students love the small assignments overwhelmingly. 100% final exams disadvantage students that are anxious. And
it's interesting. I read a former dean's book, Jack London's book, and when he was dean, he wanted to actually eliminate grading and move everything to pass fail. And he had a sort of a very egalitarian perspective about that. And tried to connect it to the real world. Rarely is about 100% exams.
Yeah, exactly. It's more like an assignment.
Yeah, and it's a cumulative
Yeah.
set of assignments. And how do you realistically? I mean, you can, and you can find ways to do it. But his view was, how do I really separate, given the consequences between an A and a B, potentially?
Yeah.
Is it fair to make that distinction based
Well,
on an artificial idea that there should be a curve?
Well, right now I'm having a real problem because I'm writing letters for students that are applying for clerkships, and we don't have marks. We don't have marks for last year, and I know the number one criteria is, are you on the Dean's Honor Roll? What were your marks, and can you explain an outlier mark? And in the absence of marks, it's the court is going to the courts are going to be there. That's the main winnower. And you get rid of most of the applicants because their marks aren't high enough. And then you've got to decide what, between those that are left, there's various things that you can look at.
Is that something, though, that creates kind of systemic discrimination?
I think if forms of evaluation are unfair, then it creates systemic discrimination. If it valorizes certain kinds of learning and valorizes those that can deal with that pressure, that have been trained to deal with that pressure, and those that have the ability to work under that pressure. Like I remember one time seeing a student whose husband left her on the day of her family law exam. She wrote her family law exam in room 311 with her 4 children. And, because she didn't have any options about, daycare. I mean, so she brought her kids to the exam with her.
Well, and I think that if we're trying to create more diverse student bodies in law school with the aim of then creating a more diverse, inclusive profession, what you're describing is actually pretty common with a lot of people who aren't in law school.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question is, how does the traditional paradigm of law school accommodate or meld to the reality of what diversity, what the life of being a diverse or different kind of person is?
Yeah.
No, and I shouldn't say different, but sort of not your stereotypical law student.
Yeah. Well, and not the kind of student who's been trained their whole life to deal with the pressure of writing an exam, because if you have the ability, for example, to go to a private school, they're going to train you how to do that from the beginning, and you've got an advantage, coming in doing that.
You, in addition to all of the other challenges that you overcame, you ultimately also became a step parent. And how did that go?
Oh, I don't know if the boys would really describe me as a step parent. They were 16 and 18 when I came into their lives, and they were a little surprised because they had no idea. Their mother hadn't been out before that, and it was, what's this? When we got married, that made a big difference for the boys. They realized this was it. This was permanent. I wasn't going anywhere. We needed to work things out. I mean, for me, what's really exciting is I always thought I would have children, and I didn't. It just was just ahead of the curve of lesbians having children. Like there were cases at the time when I would have had children about whether or not fertility clinics could discriminate against lesbians, and ultimately it was determined that they couldn't. But I love having the boys because it means I might get grandchildren. So I just think, yippee, I get grandchildren without having to raise the kids in the first place.
I'm just trying to think from my own life whether I would have wanted to step into a 16 and an 18-year-old, or whether I'm okay with starting when they're little babies. And I don't have a good answer on that one.
Yeah. Well, for me, it means I hope I get grandchildren.
So grandchildren you see as a possibility in the future. What else do you see in the future?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I have Parkinson's disease, and I was diagnosed with Parkinson's 10 years ago. So, I'm at a stage where I need to think about what difference that will make in my life. Like I've tried to mostly ignore it until now. So, but I think, it's going to start making a difference in my life. So I need to think about that a little bit. But, Jan and I are really lucky. She worked at a large law firm. She had a very successful law career, and she works she still is very actively involved with a few companies that are startup companies that are, on the verge of taking off. So, we're comfortable financially, and, our aspiration is to travel. She's doing work, for example, with women entrepreneurs in Pakistan, and so she's planning seminars in Pakistan that she delivers by Zoom, and she also works with entrepreneurs in Vietnam. So hopefully, I don't know if I want to go to Pakistan, but I think it's a hard place to travel as a woman, but I'm really looking forward to going to Vietnam with her.
Well, you've had an amazing career. Do you think that there's anything that you wish you would have done that you haven't done?
Oh, I wish I'd got more involved in Indigenous politics early on. I wish I had there were lots of ways that I tried to develop allyships. And when I was the director of the Center for Human Rights Research, we really tried to get the Right to Water project off the ground. But, when some key personnel on the project left the faculty, it was just impossible to do that. And I just am sorry that didn't happen. So I think of the 90s, I worked on sexual violence cases, the aughts, I worked on queer issues, and the teens, I worked on Indigenous issues. And it's such a difficult area to get anything done in.
Okay, well, Alexis, you've been remarkably quiet here. You and I had talked about this. What have I missed?
I don't think much. I think you hit most of everything we wanted to talk about. I think that I'm just going over my list to make sure we didn't miss any questions. I guess the other questions, like, what do you like to do in your spare time? Like when you get home from work, or not get home from work because you're teaching from home now, but when you finish the day, what do you like to do? It said, I watched your little video for Robson Hall. You like to cook. You're obviously into art. Do you have like favorite things to do to decompress?
Yeah, I love to cook. Cooking is really important. So I don't know if you can see it, but let's see if I can show off no, I'm not very good at figuring out how to show the camera. So there's our kitchen. We have a nice big kitchen, and I have an art collection. And here's a secret. I've ordered a portrait of my partner done by Andrew Volko, which will come on Valentine's Day. She doesn't know that yet, but I'm very excited about
That's so
Andrew's going to.
We've lost audio now. We've lost your sound, Karen.
She might not be able to hear us either.
Karen, are you there? We've lost your sound.
There we go. I turned it off accidentally when so.
Well, that was probably the most profound thing that you said that nobody heard.
Okay, your sound has gone down too, David.
Okay.
I can hear both of you now.
Okay.
So
what I said is probably the part you missed is that I made vinaterthus for all my siblings for Christmas.
And that's Icelandic food.
It's Icelandic cake, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. We just, as I say, this is an opportunity for us to get to know you a little bit better outside the classroom. How you making out with COVID teaching? I want to say, and I want to really give props to you. There was a case that was held in the Court of Queen's Bench a couple of weeks ago, brought by Springs Church, and the Chief Justice was kind enough to give our students some spots. And you attended, and I actually sat in on your post-mortem with the students, and I could see immediately, Karen, your level of engagement and commitment to them and how you were sort of prodding them. And it was just a wonderful thing to see, and a wonderful thing for you to take the time to do that. And I know they appreciated it. And I mean, how are you doing generally sort of through this COVID?
Well, I think I've adapted fairly well. I mean, one of the things that, I asked for and you gave me was the ability to draw on one student as a resource and for Zoom to make sure everything was working. And so that I'm nervous about technology and that worked out well. But I miss the students. Like I miss them, to the soles of my feet. I miss them. My favorite part, I work in my office 9 to 6, Monday to Friday. I'm pretty much always there. And I always encourage students to drop by, and students do. And I miss that. I just fundamentally miss getting to know students and having those conversations with students about their aspirations, their fears, their interests, and so on. And it's those little interactions that are, I just, my life just seems gray in a way without them. So now I have a Zoom call most days with the student about something or other. So I do get to connect, but that's with the students that are extroverts, the students that will make connections. The students that aren't extroverts, the ones that you sort of say, hey, do you want to talk? Come by. And they need 3 or 4 invitations before they will come by. It's really hard to reach out to those students in the COVID times.
Well, I mean, I think I mean, it's challenging for everybody who's teaching, but as I say, I think you're doing a great job and very committed, obviously, to trying to reach them, which is amazing and probably is why you get teaching awards because you care.
Yeah, I do. I love teaching. I really love
Well,
teaching.
okay, so we tried to. I'm going to try to keep this. We're just about at an hour, and I think this has been fantastic and super interesting, and it's a tremendous life. And I sort of ask you about reflecting and looking back, and I know there's a long road ahead still. And as we dug into your life, I think Alexis, you'll agree, it's quite a life well lived, and congratulations. And we appreciate you opening up your life a little bit and allowing people to get to know you a little bit better.
Well, thanks very much. It was a real pleasure to do it. So I'm glad you're interested, and I think this is a great project. I'm looking forward to seeing the videos with my fellow teachers.
I've got a first wave of willing participants, but I'm going to have to, hopefully watching this will uh, um, get them to feel it's okay, and and they'll talk to me because
Well,
mind you,
everybody's got a story. Everybody's
well,
got a story.
we felt that yours was a good way to lead because or maybe it's not a good way to lead because it's such an amazing story, and way to go. Way to go.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.